This episode is brought to you by HASA. Liquid is clearly better. Liquid chlorine is the highest purity, works immediately, has no added cyanuric acid or calcium, and it will leave your pool safe, clean, and clear. And by the Bottom Feeder professional grade battery powered vacuum system. It sucks to clean pools, so cleaning pools sucks less. Get $100 off with code DVB100.
This episode is brought to you by Skimmer, the #1 pool service software in North America. With Skimmer, you can streamline your schedule, grow your revenue, and keep your customers coming back with 5-star service. Whether you're a one-person operation or an established team, Skimmer is your partner in success. Visit getskimmer.com/poolguy to try Skimmer for free for 30 days.
The Pool Guy Podcast Show. The Pool Guy Podcast Show. The Pool Guy Podcast Show.
And welcome to the Pool Guy Podcast Show. In this episode, I'm going to go over some common myths that homeowners believe. And then, of course, I'll share the truth. And these are some that you're going to run into out there. And I think it's always good to talk about these prior so that when you do have to talk the customer down from maybe a misconception, you can do it in a proper and educated fashion. Are you a pool service pro looking to take your business to the next level? Join the Pool Guy Coaching Program. Get expert advice, business tips, exclusive content, and get direct support from me. I'm a 35-year veteran in the industry. Whether you're starting out or scaling up, I've got the tools to help you succeed. Learn more at swimmingpoollearning.com. Here's one that you're going to hear a lot out there, especially if you have a customer that's reluctant to have pool service, even though they're kind of forced to do it because they can't maintain their pool properly. Maybe a spouse has called you out there. But this one here, you'll hear a lot, and that is, basically pool maintenance is just skimming leaves off the surface. Anyone can do it. Now, in reality, yes, anyone can probably clean a pool given enough training. They can clean it properly. It's, of course, not rocket science. And when you first started learning how to clean a pool, I think you probably had the same experience I had, where there were certain aspects of it that seemed difficult, like skimming things off the bottom. Even manual vacuuming a pool. You could just humble yourself and think back to the first time you tried to manual vacuum a pool. You'll realize that keeping that tight pattern was difficult. Getting the hose out, putting the hose in, connecting it to the skimmer. All those were somewhat challenging at first until you became a pro at it, and now you can vacuum with one hand behind your back. You can prime the pool hose by sucking the water through it with your mouth and putting in the skimmer. That is actually a method, by the way. And then you can pretty much do that no problem. But pool service is actually more than that, and below the surface, pool service is actually making sure that the pool is safe to swim in for the homeowner's family, whoever hires you, their friends coming over. Commercial pools especially, this is important because your main objective in a commercial pool is to prevent disease transmission between people that are using the pool that are not related to each other. Now, a backyard pool, there's some herd immunity built in, but there still can be bacteria in the water that can be dangerous. So that's something that your primary focus is the safety of the bathers that are going to use that pool. And that does take technical training. In fact, for commercial pools, you're going to need your CPO certification. Sometimes, like in Los Angeles County, you're going to need also the health department certification for that county. Not every county requires both, but some counties do require their own tests and training to service commercial pools. And then also, it's much more than just skimming leaves off the surface, because if you take it to the level that is probably a level that you should take it to, you have to make sure that the LSI is balanced in the pool and that you are not causing scale formation or corrosive water. And I'm not going to go into detail about that, but you can look up the LSI. In fact, the best LSI calculator that I think is out there was developed by Arenda Technology. If you go to my website, swimmingpoollearning.com and scroll down to the middle of the homepage. You're going to see a link to the Arenda LSI calculator. Definitely, I suggest playing with that, putting numbers in and seeing how different things like temperature and calcium hardness affect the water as far as scale forming or corrosion. And that's also one of the things that you are watching or keeping an eye on when you're servicing someone's pool. And then, of course, there's the equipment. You're also monitoring the health of the equipment, maintaining it in such a way that you are extending the life of the equipment for the customer by cleaning the filter when it's due, making sure the pump is running effectively. There's no air getting in there that would cause slow but future damage to the pump. Things like that are all factors that you do as a pool service technician. So pool service is definitely more than just skimming leaves off the surface, and not everyone is qualified to do it, and there's some training involved, and there's some education involved, and there definitely is certification involved, and there's also liability insurance for this as well. I probably shouldn't end with this little segment without also mentioning that if you do pool service, you will need liability insurance, and it's something that you should have. If for anything you're doing, you have insurance, of course. When you're driving down the street, you have automobile insurance, your home has homeowner insurance. Why not have an insurance policy for your pool service business? And the Pool Guy Podcast Show has teamed up with UPA to bring you affordable, reliable liability insurance starting at just $64 a month. Get up to $2 million in coverage, and the members of my coaching group get an even lower rate. Protect your business and your peace of mind. Sign up with UPA today by clicking the link in the podcast description. This as well. That was actually a perfect segue into UPA, so I couldn't resist doing that at that moment. Here's another common myth, and that is if the water is clear, it's clean. And that just absolutely is not true. The water can be crystal clear, but still have bacteria and still be imbalanced in chemistry. In fact, out in the field, I'm sure you've arrived at a pool and it looks really clear, and then you test the chlorine level and it's like 1 part per million or 0, and you're like, wow, this is interesting. The water looks great, but there's no chlorine in here. It's a very dangerous situation, but the water may look clear at that moment and have no chlorine in the pool. So it's really dangerous to assume that by looking at a pool, it's going to be safe to swim in. It actually needs to be balanced, and it has to have the proper sanitizer to be safe to swim in. Now, granted, you could probably swim in a pool by yourself with no chlorine, or, if people swim in lakes all the time, in the ocean, and nothing really happens to you. But there is the possibility that if you're having a party and there's multiple people in there and there's no chlorine in the pool, that invariably someone is going to get sick because there's no sanitizer in the water. And it's one of those things where the sanitizer level has to be at a proper level to be effective to kill bacteria and viruses. And this is a debate we can have in the industry, and it's something that we've debated a long time of what the actual proper chlorine level should be in the pool. And I think if you follow Bob Lowry's principles, which I think are extremely sound, he passed away, I think, 4 or 5 years ago, but his principles are extremely sound and they set the industry precedent. He's written technical books that organizations use for their chemistry, and he was a pioneer in the industry. And I do believe that his formula still holds weight, that the free chlorine level in the pool should be equal to 7.5% of the cyanuric acid level in the pool. A simple example, if the cyanuric acid level in the pool is at 100 parts per million, the free chlorine level needs to be at 7.5 parts per million daily in that pool to allow it to be a safe swimming environment. Now, of course, pH has an effect on that as well, and the pH has to be within a certain range. And Terrarco stated in a recent podcast that he believes that the pH should not be over 7.8 in the pool, as that affects the effectiveness of the killing factor of chlorine in the pool. So there is a myth that if the pool is clear, that the water is safe to get into, and that certainly is not true. You can't really tell what's in the water by looking at it. And honestly, I've seen many pools that were pretty crystal clear that didn't have enough chlorine in it. Maybe they were at 1 part per million or 2 part per million. And yes, that kept the pool clear, but it was not safe to swim in. So just be careful of this one, because this one is a big one that's out there. And a lot of homeowners believe that just because the water looks clear, it's safe to swim in. And that's just not true. As you know from doing pool service, you've run into this situation before. And I think I'll touch on this one. And I touch on it whenever I talk about saltwater generators. But you're still going to hear this from people, that a saltwater pool does not use chlorine. This is a myth that has kind of been ingrained in the industry to the point where, it's hard to get through your customers list without someone saying this that has a saltwater pool. And there's still salespeople out there that are selling salt systems with this kind of moniker, and they're not really telling the whole truth, because the saltwater system actually generates chlorine. So it's a safe and clean way to generate chlorine for the pool, and technically it is not a chlorine pool in the sense that you're using trichlor tablets or liquid chlorine or cal hypo as the primary sanitizer. So that part is kind of true, that saltwater pool is not a chlorine pool, because in the industry we kind of distinguish between a pool that uses chlorine and a pool that's a saltwater pool. It's just a very common distinction, because you have to have that distinction. Saltwater pools are different than chlorine pools, and so that's the distinction. But the saltwater generator is making chlorine in the purest form. I like to tell customers that the saltwater generator, the salt cell, is making chlorine as if it was like a miniature factory, which it kind of is a miniature chlorine factory. It's converting the salt into chlorine in the salt cell with electricity, and is pumping out chlorine, and then it's the same cycle is happening again. It's like the circle of life kind of thing, with the salt and the chlorine production and the salt again. And that's an easy way to describe it to them, but it is a chlorine pool. The only difference is you're not using chlorine products, adding it to the pool. You're not having the chlorine stored there, but the saltwater pool is a chlorine pool in the most natural sense of it, because it's generating the chlorine at the pool. And by the way, I really do like saltwater pools, because it does produce a consistent free chlorine level without really doing much to it. So the convenience factor is definitely great. But try to let the customer know that yes, it's not technically what we could define as a chlorine pool in the sense that we're adding chlorine to it, but it is producing its own chlorine. So it is a chlorine pool in that sense. The saltwater generator makes chlorine for the pool. And then in the same vein, you hear this a lot from pool pros, and some do-it-yourself homeowners will say, you can never add too much chlorine to a pool. If the pool needs chlorine, just shock it, just add any amount to the pool. That's kind of changed since chlorine has become much more expensive. And I think this has gone out because that you can no longer get, 4 gallons of liquid chlorine for $12, or 1 pound of cal hypo is no longer $2, So it's one of those things where overusing chlorine really does affect your pool service business bottom line. And in the same respect, as a homeowner, that's going to affect your bottom line maintaining your pool, because you're just wasting chlorine at that point. And the actual truth is that you can actually overuse chlorine in the pool. Is something that if you overchlorinate the pool, it could cause damage. It could cause skin and eye irritation. It could bleach out bathing suits. I've seen it happen. Now, one of the things you have to understand is that with cyanuric acid in the pool, only 3% of the free chlorine is active. But based on the cyanuric acid level, the chlorine level can be very strong in the pool if it's really low, and it could be weaker if the cyanuric acid level is like 100 parts per million or 200 parts per million. But the matter of fact is that if you do overchlorinate the pool, and your local health department should have a maximum chlorine level. Los Angeles County has 10 parts per million as the maximum chlorine level. They'll close down a commercial pool if it's over that amount. That's quite a lot of free chlorine in the pool, 10 parts per million, by the way, but it's still safe to swim in, according to the health department. And you really don't feel the difference in effect from 10 parts per million generally, or 8 parts per million to 5 parts per million. In fact, I really like to keep all of my pools in the summertime at least at 5 parts per million, so it prevents a lot of the algae problems. And you can't tell the difference between 5 parts per million and 3 parts per million. But if you're over in the 15 or 20 parts per million range, I do believe you're going to start having some real negative effects on the bathers in there. And to me, it's really not necessary, and it's really a waste of chlorine product. And I really believe that the overuse of chlorine or overchlorinating a pool comes from two sources. One, it's one of those optical things where you look at the pool and it looks like a lot of water, and so you're going to think you're going to need a lot of chemicals a lot of chlorine, I should say, to add to that to bring it to a certain level without actually doing the math. And two, I think it was just a bad habit of the industry to shock a pool and not really calculate how much chlorine we're adding because it was cheap in the past and it's kind of stuck with us. But in reality, let me give you a real case scenario of how much chlorine you're actually going to need to bring a pool up. And you're going to be surprised by these numbers because you may be overchlorinating on your pool route or as a homeowner. But if you had a 15,000 gallon pool, which is like an average size pool in my area, and you had 0 free chlorine and you wanted to bring it to 5 parts per million, and you're using HASA 12.5% liquid chlorine, you just need 2 quarts and 1 cup, or 75 ounces, about a little more than half of a gallon of liquid chlorine to bring it to 5 parts per million. And most people are going to think you're going to need 1 or 2 gallons to do that, when in actuality, you just need 75 ounces. There's 120 ounces in a gallon, so more than half, but not more than that, and that brings it from 0 to 5 parts per million. If you're using Cal Hypo 73%, you're going to need about 13 ounces to bring it to 5 parts per million. So a little bit less than a pound of Cal Hypo will bring the pool from 0 to 5 parts per million. So like Bob Lowry stresses all the time when I was talking to him, we have to really do the math because the math really plays out that there isn't a need for a huge amount of chlorine a lot of times to bring the chlorine level up in the pool. Yes, if you're shocking a pool because it has algae and the pool turned green, you're going to need massive amounts of chlorine because a lot of that is used up fighting the algae. But in a normal situation, when you're going from 0 to 5 parts per million, you don't really need boatloads of chlorine. As I showed in an example, you need a little more than half a gallon of liquid chlorine and a little less than 1 pound of Cal Hypo. So those are some of the myths I'm covering here, and I'll probably do a second part to continue this to cover some more myths that you're going to hear out there and ways to debunk them. Looking for other podcasts, you can of course subscribe to my YouTube channel Monday through Friday. I'll post a podcast there each day. Or you can go to my website, swimmingpoollearning.com, click on the podcast icon. There'll be a drop-down menu of over 1,700 podcasts for you to listen to. And if you're interested in the coaching program, you can learn more at poolguidecoaching.com. Thanks for listening to this podcast. Have a great rest of your week, and God bless. This episode is brought to you by HASA, providing products that deliver clean, healthy water for every aspect of everyday life. The bottom feeder battery-powered vacuum system, portable, powerful, and only weighs 12 pounds. And Skimmer. Get Skimmer, America's #1 pool service software. Podcast listeners can try Skimmer for free at getskimmer.com/poolguy.